Hello and welcome to the third and final installment of Women in Games Meet the Winners webinar. And we have three amazing Hall of Famers for you today. Marie-Claire Iceman, Sande Chen, and Tanya Laird. But before we get into that, there is one person that I have to welcome to the stage, and that is, of course, Harinder Sangha from Sumo Digital. Hi, Harinder.
Hi,
how are you doing?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Not too bad.
Cool. Well, I'm really looking forward to today's webinar. If it's anything like the other two, they've been amazing. They've been so good. It's so great to hear from such amazing women, and that's really why we continue at Sumo Group to be a sponsor for Women in Games, and especially these awards. It's so great to see women actually being recognised for all of the positive that they are making in the industry. So, it very much aligns with who we are as a group. We put diversity and inclusion at the forefront of what we're doing. We've put a lot of work in it. Our work is not done. As we all know, as an industry, there's still a lot to do, across lots of different minority groups, and we're going to continue doing that. But it's great to continue being able to, we're honoured, in fact, to be able to support Women in Games.
Thank you so much. I couldn't have said it better myself. And it's wonderful to have you here, speaking of remarkable women. And thank you for everything that you and Sumo do to help Women in Games.
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. Take care.
You too.
Yeah.
All right, so now let's get to introductions. Although I have to admit, our first guest probably needs no introduction, but it's going to be fun to introduce her anyway. Marie-Claire Iceman is the CEO of Women in Games and an award-winning diversity and digital education pioneer. During her time as the program director for both the bachelor's and master's games departments at Norwich University of the Arts, she brought the percentage of women in the department, both as staff and as students, up from 0 to a 40% female student population and 50% with staff. During her time at NUA, Marie-Claire was also active in supporting wider socioeconomic, mental health, learning differences, disability, and transgender issues among a diverse student body. Since 2019, she is an industry fellow for In-Game, Creative Industries Cluster Program funded by the AHRC and UKRI. Women in Games was also awarded the Taiga Games Industry Diversity Award in 2017. As lead contributor and collaborator with the London College of Communication, she was on the winning team for the Taiga University Initiative Award in 2019 for the Fusion Project, a new approach to delivering games education. In 2018, she was given a special award at Game Rome for her outstanding diversity work in our sector. She was named the GameIndustry.biz 100 Most Influential People in Video Games, both 2017 and 2019. Wow. It is so great to have you here. Thank you.
Better unmute myself, Elizabeth. Thank you very much. And it's an interesting place to be for me tonight, after having been introducing these wonderful webinars, to be actually part of them myself. But it is true that I'd win a Hall of Fame award when I was still in the educational sector in 2014, and I'm very, very proud of that award. So it's a real pleasure to be here with the other award winners.
That's incredible. It's like getting a Lifetime Achievement Award when you're just getting started. Now. Thanks so much for being here. Our next guest is Sande Chen. She is a writer and game designer whose credits span over 15 years in the industry. Her writing credits include 1999 Independent Games Festival winner Terminus and the PC RPG of the Year, The Witcher, for which she was nominated a 2007 Writers Guild Award in video game writing. Additionally, she's the co-author of the book Serious Games, Games That Educate, Train, and Inform, and she helps organizations harness the power of video games for non-entertainment purposes. Sande, thank you so much for being here in the middle of the sweltering heat in New York.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, I'm so honored to be a part of this group and to have been nominated and to win.
Finally, last but certainly not least, we have Tanya Laird. Tanya's been at the forefront of emerging creative technology spanning games, film, TV, comics, music, immersive theater, transmedia, VR, AR, and AI. She sits as the vice president or the vice chair of Bayman Games, co-chair of the Immerse UK subgroup for content, and a board advisor to the British Games Institute. She is the creator of the VR Writers' Room and the co-organizer for the VR and AR-focused meetup group, Augmenting Reality. She is not just an inductee to the Women in Games Hall of Fame, she was also the first immersive technology ambassador for ESL UK. Tanya, thank you so much for being here.
Hello. I'll give a little bit of context because people might be wondering why I'm lying in my bed. But I am a stage 4 cancer patient and going through chemotherapy. So hence talking to you from my bed. So apologies for the pillows.
You have absolutely nothing to apologize for. It's wonderful that you can be here, and I'm so excited to talk to you tonight. So I'm going to start with an individual question for each of you, because I just frankly can't resist. Marie-Claire, I could be wrong, but it seems that of all of the Hall of Famers in Women in Games Hall of Fame, you've probably spent the most time in positions of direct power and advocacy in our industry, starting from your time at NUA to your role now leading Women in Games. So I'm really curious, how has the advocacy landscape shifted in those years? Do you think it's easier or more difficult to get meaningful support for diversity issues now than it was when you started?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a really interesting question because in some ways it's easier and in some ways it's harder. So if I take myself right back to when I first entered into the games landscape, it was fairly black and white, to coin a phrase. But I mean, it was very easy to see what was going well and what wasn't going well. And then it was quite easy for me, of course, when I took over the program at Norwich, just to see what the problem was. no female staff and, no female students, and a curriculum that was very masculine. And so I knew what I needed to do, or what I thought I needed to do, to make it just on that one level better. But of course, as I started that role, I realized there were other areas that also needed attention. So as that period moved forward, I think one of the things that happened was things became much more complex, and trying to address all of the many different areas of imbalance was really very, it required a lot of strategic thinking. And what I didn't want to do is segregate things out. So my core focus was on getting gender balance on the program. But of course, in that, and I think this is going to come up a bit more as we talk, but within that, there's also, all those other intersectionalities. So it wasn't just that straightforward. And I think now, if you're asking me about what it's like now, it's very complex now. The landscape is complex. It's really difficult at the moment, I think, to stay true to the core of what you're trying to do and not get pulled in and distracted by things that are actually not what you're about. So one of the things that I'm trying to do at Women in Games is to focus on what we are, what we do, how we do it, who we do it for, so that it's quite clear. And there are lots of other groups who are also doing similar things. And then what I think is all of these groups should come together and work together, because none of us can do everything. So, it's almost like there's a big umbrella, and then we have to try and capture everything under that umbrella by bringing all these different diverse groups together and to support each other. I think that's important. And, one of the things that we're doing at Women in Games at the moment, so for the festival this year, we are planning a series of satellite events to encourage lots of different groups to come into our festival so that it feels genuinely diverse, and they can be from any kind of community group. We did this last year at our conference, and that was really great. We had 35 different kind of community groups in there, all under the umbrella, if you like, of the event that we put on. So I think for me that's it's trying to work out how to bring all those complexities together, and how we as a sector support all that. And I think that's the challenge going forward, really. I mean, we've talked a little bit about this, haven't we, ourselves, Elizabeth?
Yeah, and I think, if there's one theme that I've seen sort of follow all three of these webinars, it's really that the thing about people in games is that you can't help but see the systems that underlie everything, and you can't help but sort of see the way that things connect. So that makes a lot of sense. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Pleasure.
Sande, I've got to say, serious games are something that's very close to my heart, and this is something that I've seen. I feel like they're often misunderstood. So I couldn't help but ask, tell us what people don't understand about the difference between what they may think of as gamification and serious games.
Right, and there are two terms that are very easily confused because, first of all, gamification as a term is passed around a lot in business quarters, and but they're for things that you wouldn't even think are video games. Like if we think about the progress bar on your credit card application, you don't think of that as a video game. But serious games are meant to be actual games or game technology that's being used to help companies or organizations or other entities outside of the entertainment industry fulfill their goals. Whereas gamification is just using an element like the progress bar or XP or badges or something like that, and just slapping it on and making it sort of an external packaging part of it, and to say that you gamified this website, you gamified this experience, rather than being a fulfilling video game experience or just a game experience. And and I love being an advocate for game design, like actual game design in a serious game.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I couldn't agree more. I think an example I always use is that sometimes gamification is looking at a mousetrap and being like, oh, if I just put this spring in this other thing, it'll get the exact same result. It's really commendable the way that you advocate to really look at games as a whole and what they can accomplish when you're using sort of the full toolkit. So yeah, thank you so much. Tanya, you have so many abbreviations in the things that you've done: AR, VR, AI.
It's just alphabet soup.
Yeah, it's alphabet soup, but in the best way. It's all what's very current and bleeding edge and exciting. What's going on in our industry, and there have been so many conversations about harassment in VR and how VR could be the great equalizer. Conversations about financial barriers to entry. So I'm just really curious for your take. Do you think that immersive technologies like VR, AR, and AI are more or less likely to create positive gaming experiences for diverse audiences? Or do you think that the system does not really impact that one way or the other?
So I think the problem is, and it's always going to send back to this, which is it really comes down to the intent of the studio on what they're trying to accomplish. And, it's one of those things that I've said very often is just because you can doesn't mean you should. And when it comes to utilizing immersive technologies, sometimes it isn't necessarily going to add anything to that experience, and people just want to put the bells and the whistles on there because it's the fancy new shiny toy. but that doesn't mean that it's necessarily enhancing the experience. And in some situations, it can actually be quite damaging when we look at the notion of creating virtual identity in virtual worlds and creating this sense of self in, you know, another environment, shall we say. And if that environment hasn't been carefully considered, there are a lot of pitfalls. You know, we're talking about like mental health and where we are at the moment with lockdown and people being trapped in their homes, and, you know, oh yeah, let's throw on a VR headset and go into an immersive world. It would be great. Doesn't necessarily equate to being a good thing, because it still allows for all of those atypical schoolyard behaviors. You know, it still allows for bullying. It still allows for, you know, singling out people. And just because you've got a virtual avatar and a virtual identity doesn't necessarily protect you in these environments. And we've already seen, you know, examples of people, you know, being bullied and being, you know, targeted within these virtual environments. And, you know, just something as simple as the fact that you leave a microphone on and you can hear that the voice of that avatar is actually a woman. And you know, therefore, that doesn't matter what you visually see in front of you from an avatar perspective, you can hear that it's a woman talking. So that changes your perspective on how you then interact with that avatar. And, you know, these are things that people don't necessarily consider. If you're going to create that barrier of illusion, you know, there needs to be full protection there, not just partial protections. And people don't really necessarily consider, as you kind of mentioned, the full toolkit. You know, they're not really thinking in that way. And, you know, as Sande kind of mentioned, you know, this notion that, you know, it's the idea of actually going in with the full intent versus kind of just slapping it on as, you know, the shiny, you know, bells and whistles, you know, as an afterthought. It's kind of like gamification in that sense, being slapped on to something afterwards. That was a really long, wordy response.
It was great, though. It was really great. I think, you know, one of the things that we sort of forget living in reality is that reality is deeply effective. Like, just going through your day, your emotions can swing so wildly depending on your environment. And so it's sort of surprising that some people working on immersive experiences aren't necessarily thinking about just how powerful that can be. Thankfully, we have you to remind us. One thing that I was struck by as I was doing research on all of you is that each of you have backgrounds that combine game development with other strongly artistic endeavors. Don't worry, I'm not going to ask if games are art, because it is not 2010. But I do, Marie's laughing. I do have to ask, what do you think is currently coming out of the game industry right now that will really affect the way that art is made and experienced in the future? And what do you think the line is between something being interactive and something being experiential?
So I don't. Sorry, I'm.
Tanya, go.
I'm going to dive.
Tanya, you take it, and I'll come in. I'll come in later.
One of the things that I think, you know, when you say what's coming out of the games industry, I think it's actually really important to look at what's happening outside the games industry at all of these other industries, and especially where the technology is and what that interaction with those technologies can be. And I think when you look at what the film industry is doing at the moment and where we are with things like LiDAR, for example, and augmented reality and, you know, 360 immersive experiences and, you know, those types of technologies that people are kind of toying around with and experimenting with, they have a lot of application, you know, within the context of gaming as well. And so from my perspective, it isn't just looking at the games industry and what's coming out of the games industry, And don't get me wrong, there's some great stuff coming out of the games industry. But when we're talking about, you know, cutting edge experiences and, you know, that kind of, you know, forward focus, I think we have to look beyond the games industry, and we have to be much more inclusive, not just from a gender perspective or, you know, those kind of things, but also from a technology perspective. You know, we have to be inclusive from a cultural perspective and a technology perspective as well. That's just my thought.
So I just want to say that my writing is now in an art gallery as writing, and that's amazing, because we always think of an art gallery being either having visual arts or being more of like photography or sculpture or painting or mixed media. But to have experiences that will be different from what we expect, and to experience them in an environment that is like an art gallery, and to have something very personal like that there is, and I was amazed that my writing was accepted in a exhibit about work created during the pandemic. But I want to go on and talk about the interactive and experiential. First of all, interactive doesn't mean it's enjoyable. And I could have a movie and then stop in the middle and tell you to do 5 push-ups, and that's interactive. You know, that's it doesn't. It's the same thing as, you know, assuming that nonlinear means that we're having this wonderful video game experience. So I would think that, you know, when we're looking at what is the personal experience and the player experience, that's a whole different thing. You know, we're combining a lot of things too, and we have a lot of things to think about. But I really like that I'll be able to see my students' work in art galleries, and they don't necessarily have to be really weird or really out there, but it's going to be more mainstream, in that we could have a retrospective on one person's work one day. Or we do now, but more of that.
Shall I say a little something myself?
Please.
Here? Okay, so, I mean, for me, I think, you know, games embody a mixture of creative disciplines and historical lineage. And this makes them not only complex to make, but I think complex to position. So I feel that that historical lineage is the history of play, which is older than, you know, goes way, way, way back. The history of performance, so there's a lineage there. The history and lineage of illusion, which cinema is part of as well. But, you know, those illusory spaces that we lose ourselves in. You know, I remember very early on when I was delivering a lecture at Norwich, I was looking at some houses, some old houses in Pompeii, where the walls are covered in little, you know, Trump loyal images of gardens. So the inside of these Roman houses had already these illusory spaces, and that was at the level of that they could do then. But I mean, they're very beautiful and they're very, very engaging. Also on the walls of those buildings were little cherubs doing kind of mischievous things, almost like little sprites in, you know, little game characters. You could easily see them already coming to life and doing mischief. And for me, that connection to the past and that idea of you know, illusory spaces that human beings want to go to and get lost in, I think it's been with us for a long time. Obviously, I think another area of lineage is the visual arts, and we see that more and more in terms of how you know, games are constructed and the imagery that is being used. I think there's obviously mathematics, because that's the whole other lineage and history that's in the background there, and storytelling. But sometimes I feel that we move into certain parts of things, you know, we focus. So for instance, there's a big focus on storytelling in games, where I can see a lot of other places where storytelling actually, maybe in a book or a film, can be more powerful maybe, I'm being provocative here, whereas play and that lineage is not in everything else. So for me, that lineage is not being fully exploited yet. And I would like, to see more experimental work done around playfulness. And our human desire to be playful. Children play, and I think adults want to be playful. So, then all these things, and this is why games are so complex, all these things are brought together through a blend of art, science, and technology. So there's they're a big piece of work. And I do agree with, what Sande said and Tanya, that, it's not just games, and games cross over. I mean, there are these wonderful theatre groups now that do, kind of playful performances. And as Sande said, the sort of gallery experiences. And I did want to highlight here, because I have to, but one of my students, Sophia, my ex-graduate, Sophia George, she was the first game designer in residence at the V&A. And she made a really wonderful little, it wasn't a game, I think it was really an experience, but it was based on the William Morris textiles print, and it was called The Strawberry Thief. And I just really loved that idea that she was able to go into the museum, and then she was able to create that from the collection, and to be one of the first people to ever do that. And I think we should do more of that. And I think that to me, I think that's what is coming, and that is what's coming into the future. Right now, I'm going to get off my soapbox and let someone else say something.
Honestly, that was wonderful. That felt like a very quick masterclass in the history of games. So thank you for that. And Tanya, I really agree with you too. I think that part of what I think I was trying to get at is that I feel like the game industry is very often sort of looks at everything as in, like, technology comes from games, and that's what we output. And then what we are aspiring to be more like artistically is like books and movies and that kind of thing. But it's interesting to think about the things that we have to offer the other artistic industries. And you're absolutely right that we have so much more to offer than our technology. And also that we don't have a monopoly on the technology that will change the way that we experience art in the future. Absolutely. I could talk about this for literally the rest of this, but we're going to take a brief break to hear from Rebecca Sampson of Hangar 13 so they can talk a little bit about their support for the Women in Games Awards.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for this extra special webinar where we celebrate the Women in Games Award winners from the past years. I'm Rebecca Sampson, Director of Operations at Hangar 13. Diversity and inclusion is incredibly important to Hangar 13, and we continue exploring ways that we can create an environment where all employees can come to work as themselves whilst feeling empowered and having a sense of belonging. Collaborating with Women in Games for the past 3 years has been an essential partnership for the studio to help make the games industry a welcoming place for women to build their careers. It has been a privilege to be part of such a fantastic organisation and to watch Women in Games grow from strength to strength and to expand its global community, which has been more important than ever this past year. As a corporate partner, Hangar 13 is honoured to sponsor the Hall of Fame Award, which helps showcase the outstanding achievements of inspirational women within the games industry. I look forward to hearing from some of these fantastic women today and hope you all enjoy this very special event. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca and Hangar 13, for your support of the awards. It means the world to us. Back to questions. So Well, obviously, there is a very long way to go towards gender diversity in the game industry. In recent years, there's been a really welcome, deliberate focus on ensuring that diversity doesn't just mean hiring more white cisgender women. So my question for the three of you is, what advice do you have for hiring managers and studio heads who want to build a genuinely diverse workplace?
Shall I start with that one, Elizabeth? Sure. Okay, I mean, there is still a long way to go. I think you're absolutely right. When I think about women, I think of 50% of the population. I think 50% of players. Then I look at stats on who works in the games industry. They range globally for anything at the moment from 14% to 28%. So that's already quite low. And then within that, I think about all of the intersectional areas. So I do, you know, there is obviously a whole wider diversity dimension, but as CEO of Women in Games, I'm looking at a very particular part of it. And I think that it is about looking at the complexity. So what I was talking about earlier is when I read some HR guidance on hiring, when I look at some of those things, what I see is there's a kind of a desire to make it punchy and simple, and it's not. So one of the first things that I would say is embrace the complexity and then try to really consider that complexity properly, because, you know, there are so many different aspects that impact. I do think, you know, I was interesting, and I was talking to somebody about internships the other day, and, you know, we were talking about, you know, how can you create internships probably for, you know, lower socioeconomic background, for instance. Let's just take that, because to be able to do an internship, you may well have to have certain things in place to be able to do that. You may need not to do any other work while you do that internship. But if that internship doesn't pay you, then you won't be able to do it because you come from a background where it's simply not possible. And so I feel really strongly that, you know, studios as well should invest. They should have areas of their business that are really wholly, you know, invested and funding and fund that to make sure that in those areas that, you know, they are seeing the complexity. Because it's one thing to say, yes, we provide internships, but the complex question is to who and how. So, you know, that's what I think that's where we're at right now. Is it's about digging deeper, which is not always attractive, and it's not always easy to do. But I do think it's the duty of our sector to do that in order to advance it properly and to give everybody a fair chance at, you know, having a potential career in our industry.
I'm going to jump onto the back of what Mary-Claire was saying here, which was that one of the areas that certainly I was working on before all of the medical situations was working very closely with the East London Arts and Music College, and looking at building programs into that kind of interstitial stage of education. So not waiting until they're at university, getting them while they're still a little bit younger, and introducing gaming programs into those environments, because what we're looking at is a fundamental issue. You know, you're talking about socioeconomic, you know, challenges for internships, but it goes back even further than that, which is that if we look at the socioeconomic backgrounds of young children, you know, even from the age of around 6 to 8 years old, and if you were to say to a young girl, what do you, you know, feel are your chances or your opportunities to be, you know, in the games industry, and they would kind of be like, it's not really a girl's thing, it's not really a thing for me, and they're already categorizing themselves as not being able to do that thing. And we need to be working towards, adjusting some of those perceptions to allow them to have those opportunities to engage, and to feel like actually this is something for them. And it doesn't matter whether they are, from a low social, background, that they don't have access to things. Give them that access through their college and secondary education. Don't wait until they've gone through all of those hoops to get to university, where there's already so many expectations from a family perspective, from a social perspective, all of those kind of expectations of what they're going to do once they're at university. It's almost too late at that stage,
Right. I mean, I think that was the purpose of the nonprofit that I was part of, called Girls in Games, that we were trying to get them before university because there just wasn't enough people to recruit because they weren't getting the degrees in computer science. So we tried to get them way before that to try to interest them in careers in the video game industry. But in the overbroad for now, I mean, that obviously that's for the next generations and so forth. I would tell hiring managers to look beyond their network. I know that it's a easier thing to get referrals, but often you're getting referrals from the same type of person that you got, they're referring one of their friends that may not be too diverse. You also could look at other industries that may have similar skill sets. And they may not, video games may not be on their radar for these candidates, but maybe there's some way to interest them. And so, and I think a lot of the women in the early days may have come from, other industries and came in. But I think that's one of the things is that companies say, like, we want them to fit into our company culture. But then are you looking at just one point of view at that point? And diversity really helps your bottom line. It brings in all these diverse and interesting viewpoints, and you can see things that you otherwise wouldn't have noticed or paid attention to about your user base. Even simpler things like I was left-handed working on a shooter. And I complained because I was like, I can't reach any of these hotkeys in time because I use the mouse in my left hand. And this is a simple thing. You could do something about this. And it's just about thinking about those accessibility issues.
Sande, I think you're right, and Tanya as well. I think both of you are saying the right things. I think what it comes down to, though, is within the educational sector, it has to be driven. And I know that because of what I drove myself. And at school level, it has to be driven. So the school has to be invested in it as well. I mean, we've recently had a really great school get in touch with us, and that's because there is a head teacher who is interested in technology. She wants the girls to do really well. And so she reached out and got in touch and said, look, would you help us? Would you speak to the girls? Would you do this? And now that was run by her. I wouldn't have never found this school. The school came to me. And I feel that, it's not just something that will have. So inside studios, in terms of hiring, if we go back to your question, Lisa, it has to be driven. It has to be driven high up. It has to be. So someone at the top, in the top echelons of the company, has to say, we're putting some effort into this. This is getting some resource. We are going to do this. This is important. And there are studios who are doing that, and for definite they are. And I think doing that, they're getting very good results. They're reaching out to the community, they're reaching out to schools, they're doing a lot of work. So, and I think that's best practice. And we are moving forward, but it's patchy, is what I'd say. So, and what we want is for it to be less patchy, and it's coming. I'm going to be positive.
I think it is. And I think, what Women in Games specifically, and what so many advocacy groups for women in games is able to accomplish is really remarkable, considering the fact that right now, as Marie-Claire says, 14 to 28% of the game industry is female. And that 14 to 28% of our industry is supposed to represent half of the population of the world. It's a lot to try to pack, for lack of a better term, pack that much diversity, try to make that 14 to 28% accurately represent the players and accurately represent the world. So it's definitely a tricky thing for sure. Right before we go into our last question, I just wanted to throw out a reminder that we're going to be doing Q&A very soon. So please log your questions in the stream, and I'll definitely be excited to answer them. And right before we go to our final question, I'd like to share with you guys a Sumo promotional show reel video.
The brave, bold, heroic Sack Boy.
A struggle for freedom, the likes of which our world has never seen.
Oh, hello.
We're coming for you.
Thank you once again to Sumo Group for being the overall award sponsor. I know it means a lot to women in games, and it means a lot to me personally, because that's why I get to talk to these three amazing women tonight. Last question before we go to Q&A. It's really remarkable to me the way that all three of you have really spent the majority of your careers at the very forefront of the parts of the industry that you're each most passionate about. So I have to ask, what is the impact you're hoping to leave on your corner of our industry? Who wants to take this one first?
I'll go first. And so I work in entertainment and I work in serious games as well, but I always feel like I still want the player to be thinking about different issues, even in an entertainment game, to make it more meaningful. And I've written articles about making our games more meaningful. And it's not to mean that, you can't have an entertaining experience, but also that it can be much more than just an entertaining experience. And I think that's possible because movies do it and books do it, and even music. And that's what I like, is that to know that you have really affected somebody, that they sat down and they thought about it even after the game was finished. It's something that even if they just said like, wow, I just really enjoyed that part of the game, or this part really made me think.
So from my perspective, when you talk about legacy and what do you want to leave behind, within the industry as such, for me, the fundamentals of what, my career has been about building bridges between different industries and different, intersectional points, if you like, to create conversation. And as long as those conversations continue to happen and people are able to be open-minded and to facilitate conversation and to, allow for that space to explore, then, for me, that's success. That's a win, because we're getting people to talk who wouldn't otherwise have spoken before. And this isn't just in entertainment that we're talking about. We're talking about very diverse industries. The automotive industry, engaging with the games industry, or the defense industries, engaging with the games industry. There are so many different types of conversations that could be had, and that's pretty much, for me, the most important thing is opening that door, creating those bridges, and facilitating those conversations.
Okay. Shall I go for this, Elizabeth, now as well? I think that I spend a lot of my time comparing the games industry to other sectors, looking at the stats for them, looking at how well they're doing, how good they are at, their diversity. And I think one of the things that really strikes me is that I want the games industry to be a shining beacon. I want our sector to be the very best. And part of being the very best is to get that right and to be better than those other sectors. And to be a fair industry, to put fairness, which encompasses so many things, at the heart of what you're doing. And that's not just about gender, that's across the board. So I think fairness matters to me. And then I think from a very personal perspective, I think back of all those women historically who fought for women's rights, the suffragettes, feminists, in the 70s. I think of how the world has changed. I think how we have the Equality Act in 2010. And, the legacy I want is to have been part of that journey into, the changing lives for women in the world. And this is just a really funny little aside, that when I was doing some research not that long ago, I was looking into when women were first able to have bank accounts of their own. And it turns out that wasn't until the 1970s. So prior to the 1970s, if you were a woman, you could not, you couldn't have a bank account of your own. So all your money was wrapped up in somebody else's money. And, that's not that long ago. Not in the great scheme of things. So, I'm constantly, looking around at those kinds of things. And so, personally for me, it's to be part of that journey that moves us forward and moves society forward.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I really agree. It's so wild when you think back how recently things have changed and how many things still need to change. One of the funny things, Sande, that your comment reminded me of is one of my favorite pieces of movie trivia, which is the very, let's say, entertainment focused Adam Sandler movie, 50 First Dates, where Adam Sandler dates a woman who has memory loss, and basically every time they go on a date, it's like she doesn't remember him. The way that movie script handled her dementia actually became protocol. Where spoilers for anyone who is really concerned about the ending of 50 First Dates, Adam Sandler makes a series of videos for her, sort of reminding her about their life and their kids and everything, which is now what they do for a lot of dementia patients. The first thing that they'll do in the morning is watch videos made by their loved ones. And I don't think anyone would call an Adam Sandler movie a serious film, the way that we have serious games.
Better than Memento, where he tattooed all the information on his skin. So
right. But it's, yeah, I strongly identify it's great to have ideas can come from anywhere, and especially from entertainment, because that's one of the reasons that we engage in entertainment is just to think about the things that we want to think about.
And, you know, I think that's actually what makes some stories more satisfying, is that it's something you will think about later, and that there is more depth to it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's go to Q&A from the audience. The first question, I think, is one that I'm sure you'll both have interesting perspectives on, which is, what advice do you have for women trying to maintain and or assert leadership or control of projects within a male-centric environment?
Oh, I think that's very tricky, and it has to do with a lot of social psychology and a very tricky experience. I mean, I've been in situations where my voice felt silenced, and it's actually not a very good feeling to go to work every day and be through that. What you need to have is an ally who's on your side, and if not, you also have to evaluate, is this a place you want to stay? Because it's not nurturing you. You can't go up and be promoted because they're not valuing your expertise. But in the short run, it is actually to write everything down and make sure that higher ups see it, and try to get your voice out there. But you will need some allies there.
Yeah, it is a very difficult one, and I've been in the situations, as Sandy describes myself. I've learned a lot actually along the way, and I think that it's much harder when you're younger. But as you get older and you have more experience, then it becomes easier to know how to stand up for yourself in the right way. I think what Sandy said about keeping records and doing things. As an example, I had a situation where I'd had a review of my work, which I knew had been excellent. All sorts of figures and stats and everything, 100% of this, 100% of that. And I was given a good. I was given a small tick and a good. And I was asked to sign it, to sign off that I'd been a good girl, I'd done good work. I hadn't, I'd done excellent work. So I just refused to sign it, and I kept refusing to sign it. So it escalated into all sorts of areas. And, it's difficult because then you become labeled as difficult, you become labeled as a troublemaker. But I think I had reached a point in my life where I just thought, well, so be it. But that I'm sticking to this, and I'm going to keep on with it. It got resolved in the end. But, there were moments when I think, I had to be very, very strong. I think Sandy's right. If you can find allies, that's obviously the best thing. But if you can't, then you have to, you just have to try and find the strength in yourself. And it's not a good place, because really, I think there should be better systems in place within organisations to help solve some of these things. To help to resolve some of these tensions that happen. I could talk about this for an awfully long time, but I'm looking and we only have 6 minutes, and I think Tanya's got her hand up, so I'm going to stop talking about it. But yeah,
I just want to throw in here, because I think it's really important to understand that when you talk about asserting yourself and trying to maintain control of a project when you're in a male-centric environment, is you have to remember that facts are your friends, and every single thing that you try to, qualify, you're going to have to make sure you've got all of the facts behind you, and that you've got, lots and lots of data and research behind every single decision that you're making, so that there isn't any question about your decision so much as here's the proof and here's the evidence. Do you want to go with the evidence, or do you want to go with your gut? and then it's less about you and more about the data. You need to try and detour that the way that people are going to perceive you. And the other thing, Marika mentioned, about being seen as difficult and, a problem, troublemaker is, this is absolutely always going to be the case when it comes to a woman in a position of supposed power, is that the minute you do cause any kind of a bump in the road there, everything is just magnified beyond any kind of scope of, you might have said, it's one small thing and they take it completely out of context. And that's the danger. That's what you're fighting against, is those perceptions. And how do you, make sure that within the context of the studio, you have enough allies, as Sandy mentioned, you have enough people around you that can back you up and can kind of give that qualification of, well, she sounds like she's being kind of, reasonable to me. The more people you have around you that can say that, because even just one person, one male saying that about a female suddenly makes that female more, somebody that you want to listen to because somebody's backed them up. And it is something as simple as just having one guy on your side to qualify every decision. And I actually did this in a studio once where I had a few issues where I had an ally on my side, and every board meeting that we went into, I would make a suggestion or try to put a point forward, and I would get wish-washed. It's like kind of like, yeah, whatever, that. And then he would literally just repeat exactly what I had said in exactly the same manner with exactly the same phraseology, and they would all go, "Oh, that's a brilliant idea!" And then he would deliberately go, "Yeah, but Tanya mentioned it first," just to make sure that it was steered back to me so that it was qualifying. Actually, she did put that idea up first. So sometimes that's what you need. You need that help with re-steering perception, especially when you're dealing with a lot of male-centric egos in a boardroom. Anyway, that's just my thoughts on the matter. I will shut up now.
They're excellent thoughts, though, and I think that that's a really great example of what an ally is and what an ally can do. I think it's worth reminding people that, being an ally isn't just thinking good thoughts about trying to help marginalized people in games. It's about lending your voice, lending your power, and really making sure that you're helping pave a path for them. Unfortunately, we are only about 2 minutes out. So 1 minute out now. So that's, I think, going to be the end of the Q&A. But if you've enjoyed this webinar, and if you've seen or enjoyed any of the previous with the Hall of Fame Awards coming up for this year. I believe nominations are open right now at the URL right below Sandy's face. And and don't forget that you're also eligible to nominate yourself. One of the things that has become really clear in talking to the amazing women that I've talked to over the last 3 weeks is that you can't always wait for somebody else to do it for you. You're remarkable. You should nominate yourself. So please do keep that in mind. And once again, thank you so much to Marie-Claire and to Sandy and to Tanya. This was truly, truly wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Elizabeth.